What I've got here is just a roll of crescent rolls, you know, the ones with the doughboy hee-hee sort of guy. What I have now, we're going to just toss a little bit of flour over the top here so we can roll them out. There we go. Now, the crescent rolls always have these perforated edges so you can tear them apart. What we'll do is just carefully pinch those closed. Don't worry about getting it too well because we're going to end up rolling it out anyway. Now, in the end, this has to fit into a pie pan. Obviously, that's not the right size. We want it to be about 1 inch wider than the pie pan is round. Just grab your rolling pin and carefully stretch that dough right out. If it curls up, don't worry about it. If it starts separating, just pinch it back together again. So now that I've got that cut out into the shape I want, we're just going to fold it up into a nice little cone shape. And that'll help us get it into the pan. So we fold it in half, and in half again. Bring our greased pie pan over. In this case, it's just sprayed with a little bit of oil spray. And we unfold. Alright, so that last step was a bit of a doozy, and as you can see, we've got some tearing going on here. That's where this extra dough comes in. You just take it, and remember, nobody's going to see the inside of the pie. So we're just going to carefully, but roughly, patch up some of those seam holes. Don't worry about the edges, because that's going to be taken care of when we go through and crimp it. So I've got this big hole over here, but I'm not that worried about it, because that's just going to get covered up like that. And now we're just going to fold the edges in. This is a process called blind baking. In this case, there's nothing in it except for just another pan to hold it down. That's going to go into an oven at 250 for 20 minutes just to crisp it up. Otherwise, the crust won't cook properly while we've got the quiche in. For this next part of the quiche, we need to separate some eggs. We're going to separate them so we've got the yellows in one bowl to make a custard and the whites in another to fluff to make an egg white foam. In order to separate the eggs, you take your egg, and what I've got is I've just got a plate over here that's inverted, so we've got this nice little ridge. We crack the egg right around the median, just like that, and very carefully over a separate container, crack that egg open. And the reason I'm using this extra container is so that we can properly contain the egg yolk. If we get any of that egg yolk into the egg whites, the whites will not fluff properly. The fat just gets in there, and it doesn't allow the foam to properly take. By doing this, we can really get in there, take a look around, make sure that there's nothing in there. If there is, just grab a little spoon, carefully scoop it out, dump it into our egg yolks. There we go. And then take our egg white, and voila! Nice, clean egg whites. For this next step, what we've just got a tablespoon or so of butter down in the bottom of a saucepan, and we're going to take some minced onions, half of a minced onion that I chopped up earlier, and we're going to start just sweating that out a little bit. So I've got the butter melted. It's starting to get some good sizzle down there. Now we're going to turn the heat down to about medium. There we go. And now that the onion's all nice and soft, we're going to go ahead and add 2 tablespoons of flour. Just about. And what that's going to do, the butter in there is going to coat up this flour, and that's going to help us thicken the batter later. This process is actually called making a roux. You don't want it to go too much farther than that light yellow. That's called a blonde roux, by the way. And that's where we want to slowly start adding the milk. You do want to do this slowly so you can get it nice and evenly incorporated. If you add it too quick, it'll get chunky, and that never makes for good food. The next part of what we're doing is taking the egg yolks that we separated out earlier, and we're going to create a custard base. This is going to be the real flavor base of the entire quiche. Now we're using a souffle method, which requires the egg whites and the egg yolk custard separately. To do this, what we're doing, I've got 1 cup of cheese that I've measured out. I'm going to pour that right in here, and we're going to mix that right together. That's going to give us a little bit of insurance so that the egg yolks don't curdle when we start adding the hot milk and onion mix to it. There we go. We're also going to add in any seasonings that we're going to use. In this case, it's just salt and pepper. Simple salt and pepper. Now, because we've got ham going into this, you want to be light on the salt, but a little heavier on the pepper. We're going to pick up a lot of the salt flavor from that ham, and pepper plays very well with ham. Now, we're going to slowly start tempering in our milk mix over this way. If we were to add this all at once, there's a very good chance we'd scramble our eggs, and that's not what we're going for. So we're going to add that slowly, one scoop at a time, mix it together until it looks nice, and those egg yolks are going to be nicely heated through, so they're not going to just automatically scramble when we add them back into the pot and start putting the spurs to it to melt the cheese. So I've got the pot turned back on now. We're going to pour this mix right back in there. Scrape out the extras. We don't want to leave anything behind if we can avoid it. There we go. Set that aside. And once this comes up to a good heat to melt the cheese, we'll turn it back down and we'll start adding in the ham and the spinach. So because we're putting together this quiche using the souffle method, we need to make an egg white foam. In order to do that, we need to take the egg whites that we separated out earlier, and I'm going to use this great stand mixer that I've got, and we're going to whip those all together. Now, that can be sort of a tricky process. If you do it too long or don't do it enough, you're not going to get a stable egg foam. One way to fix that is to use cream of tartar. And the ratio for that is 1/8 of a teaspoon to every egg white that you use. That just provides you a little bit of insurance to know that your egg whites aren't going to just crumble apart later on. Now, this is a half teaspoon. We've got three egg whites in there. I'm sorry, it's a 1/4 teaspoon. We've got 3 egg whites, so that means we need 1.5 of these. There we go. And now we just pop this down, take it on, and there she goes. All right, so I've done that whole process, and what you're looking for when that whole thing is done is for an egg white foam that looks something like this, where you can put your whisk in, pull it straight up, flip it upside down, and you've got this great peak that the egg whites now make. We're going to mix our ham. I've got 3/4 of a cup of finely diced ham and 3/4 of a cup of chopped, drained, frozen spinach. And that spinach really wants to be thoroughly drained if you can. Any extra liquid in this is going to make for a runny quiche. Mix that into our custard base. So there we go. And now we're going to gradually incorporate our egg whites into this. You want to do this in 3 batches. The first one just goes right in and just stir that one to your heart's content. You're just doing this to lighten up that base, just to make it easier to fold the rest of it in later. So there. That looks pretty good. Now we're going to come back over, grab half of what's left. There's that. And we're just going to carefully fold that in. Don't worry about leaving some white streaks. That's going to be fine. Those are going to cook out in the end anyway. The important part is to just carefully do this so that you're not breaking up that foam, which is still very delicate even though we've used that cream of tartar. Now for the last batch, just go ahead and pour that right on top. And I've got another cup of the shredded cheese that we reserved. We're going to use half of that and fold that in there with this egg white, and that's just going to add some contrasting colors. It's going to add some nice depth to the dish. So I've gotten all that incorporated, and here's that crust that we took out earlier. As you can see, it's not fully cooked; it's just partially cooked, still very loose. We've got it on top of a baking sheet. That way, in case this custard, this foam does manage to rise and explode, we've got something to catch it. This part is critical. You just take it, and you very carefully Okay. Not really careful. You just pour it in. Scrape out any extras. There we go. Now, for topping, I've got that reserved cup of cheese and a quarter cup of panko breadcrumbs. We're just going to mix that together real quickly. Just sort of crumble it together with your hands to make a crumble. And that's pretty good. And just sprinkle that over the top like this. And that's going to make a beautiful crust in the end. There, don't worry about getting it even because it's all just going to melt away. We've got that. We turned the oven up to 375, and now this is going to go in for 20 to 30 minutes or until you can stick a knife into the center of it and pull it out and have it mostly clean.